I'm trying to figure out how a group that I'd never heard of all of a sudden is so important and so dangerous that we have to bomb Syria because of Khorasan. Now, wait a minute, I thought ISIS was the big problem, right? No, all of a sudden Khorasan is the big problem. So it turns out I'm not alone. Over at The Intercept, they thought this was curious as well, and then they did some terrific reporting to show you what the press was saying, what they're saying now, what administration officials were leaking to them, and this is Glenn Greenwald and Murtaza Hussain who put this piece together. Now, you have to understand why we might all of a sudden want to fearmonger about Khorasan and who they are. Wait till you find out at the end what they might or might not be at all, okay? So when you attack Syria, you need some sort of legal defense to do it. Now, I know in America nobody cares. We just start wars, you don't go get congressional authorization, etc. But if you start a war with no justification at all, it is a war crime, and you could have trouble with the United Nations at some point. It might hamper President Obama's vacation plans in Switzerland at some point, right? So he needs a technical, legal reason to be able to bomb Syria. Because he has said over and over again, even though we're going to bomb ISIS, ISIS is not an immediate threat to America. President Obama is on the record saying that multiple times. So they need a quote-unquote immediate threat. So right as we're about to bomb them, all of a sudden here comes this group, Khorasan, that nobody had ever heard of. Oh, and guess what they are, guys? Turns out they're an immediate threat. Really? So let's look at the news reports before any doubt set in. As we're doing the bomb, oh, we got to bomb these sons of bitches. We're doing the bombings. Khorasan's super dangerous. Well, administration officials are going to talk to the Associated Press, and here's their reporting on that. While the Islamic State group ISIS, they say, is getting the most attention now, another band of extremists in Syria, a mix of hardened jihadis from Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, and Europe, pose a more direct and imminent threat to the United States, working with Yemeni bomb makers to target U.S. aviation. American officials say at the center is a cell known as the Khorasan Group, a cadre of veteran al-Qaeda fighters from Afghanistan and Pakistan who traveled to Syria to link up with the al-Qaeda affiliate there, the Nusra Front. So far, we got Yemeni bomb makers, we got pirates from the Caribbean, we've got guys who are going to Syria, we got the Nusra Front, we got al-Qaeda offshoot, we got guys more dangerous than ISIS. Oh my God, we better bomb them right away. They continue. But the Khorasan militants did not go to Syria principally to fight the government of President Bashar Assad, U.S. officials say. That's the important part, U.S. officials say. Instead, they were sent by al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri to recruit Europeans and Americans whose passports allowed them to board a U.S.-bound airliner with less scrutiny from security officials. Okay, let's pause and analyze that for a second. Even before doubt set in on this story. Really? You need to go to Syria to make bombs? Couldn't you make bombs anywhere? Okay, fine. Maybe there's less scrutiny in making the bomb in Syria. Okay. It's easier to get on a plane to America from Syria? Who writes that down? So, but it was a U.S. official. They gave a leak to the Associated Press, so the Associated Press must run with it as if it's true, right? But they're not alone. They're nowhere near alone. Here's CBS News. They said, this morning we're learning of a new and growing terror threat coming out of Syria. It's an al-Qaeda cell you probably never heard of. Well, that part is true. We hadn't, because it's made up. Nearly everything about them is classified. Bob Orr is in Washington with new information on a group some consider more dangerous than ISIS. So ISIS more dangerous than al-Qaeda. Now there's an al-Qaeda splinters group even more dangerous than ISIS. Oh my God. By the way, how does this not smell like the same exact bullshit that we saw before the Iraq War invasion? Now, we said on this show, look, there are some real threats that from ISIS, and there are things that they have done, but the hype is overblown. And then now you got this new group that isn't even ISIS, that no U.S. official had ever said anything about. All of a sudden, all of these outlets, CNN, New York Times, CBS, Associated Press, breaking these stories. Gee, I wonder if they leaked them all to you at the same time for a purpose, and you knuckleheads wrote them down without even thinking about it. In fact, Greenwald and Hussain write a very good point. Then followed an avalanche of uncritical media reports detailing this supreme threat, excitingly citing anonymous officials as though they had uncovered a big secret the government was trying to conceal. You see, just because it's a breaking news from your inside source of the government doesn't mean it's true. In fact, if they're all leaking at the same time, you didn't really break a story. What you did was you got used as a tool to write down things that you should be a little bit more circumspect about and questioning about. You should do your job as a reporter, but there are very little of those left in the country. So then here comes Eli Lake at the Daily Beast to make a total mess of it. So he says that they're using hard-to-detect explosives on American and European airliners. I know before they were going with the easy-detect explosives, they've decided new breaking threat, hard-to-detect explosives. Wow, that is a new story. Really interesting. Next thing you know, they'll be hiding it in their underwear or in their shoes. By the way, another made-up story was about how they have new clothes that explode. Okay, evidence on that? Nowhere to be found. Okay, Eli Lake continues. The planning from the Khorasan group suggests at least an aspiration to launch more coordinated and larger attacks on the West in the style of the 9/11 attacks from 2001. See what he did there? At least an aspiration. Aspiration means total bullshit. They once thought about it, and they're aspiring to do that. Have they planned to do it? Do they have any bombs? Do they take any real action? No, but they have an aspiration to do. But in that same sentence, 9/11! 9/11! To do things worse than 9/11. By the way, the same reporter at Daily Beast, Eli Lake, later in the piece talked about how they might be connected to Iran. He said that's a surprising twist. Yeah, that would be a surprising twist because Iran is Shia and the Nusra Front and Al-Qaeda are Sunni and they despise each other even more than they despise us. Yeah, that would be surprising. That's part of what makes it totally untrue. I don't know if he does propaganda on purpose or he's just a tool and doesn't know a thing about foreign policy, which he writes about. Okay, so now we go to the culprit behind Khorasan, the leader of Khorasan. The official said, this is in the New York Times, said that the group is led by Muhsin al-Fadli, a senior Al-Qaeda operative who, according to the State Department, was so close to bin Laden that he was among a small group of people who knew about September 11, 2001 attacks before they were launched. And another piece of reporting, another outlet said that he was one of the financiers behind 9/11. Interesting, because I read in the article, now The Intercept didn't point this out, this is part of the reading I did last week, that Fadli was now dead, you know, he's one of the guys we bombed, at 33 years old. Let's do a quick math on that. So on 9/11 of 2001, when he was financing and leading the 9/11 attacks against us, he would have been around 20 years old. Did no one think, that's curious. I mean, I suppose you could have a 20-year-old financing 9/11, working closely with Al-Qaeda and bin Laden being one of the top leaders, but a guy we'd hardly ever heard about, and certainly not ever in relationship to a group called Khorasan. Yes, there'd been some reward on his head back in 2012, but now all of a sudden, one of the masterminds of 9/11 at 20. And by the way, if you were financing it and planning it, you would have been even younger when you were doing that before 9/11, right? At the age of 15, this guy already had loads of cash from his lawn mowing job in Afghanistan, and he was financing this group. He's dangerous. He's the leader of Khorasan. What other bullshit do you have for me? Okay? Look at how miserable the mainstream press is in America. All these outlets, CBS, New York Times, Associated Press. Oh, I have an inside source. I have an inside source. Yes, sir. Let me write it down. Yes. Oh, okay, I will do stenography for you. I am the best stenographer there ever was. Oh, this Khorasan is so dangerous. That was worse than 9/11, worse than ISIS. Jesus Christ. Okay, so what does President Obama do? After they leak all this stuff, he says, once again, it must be clear to anyone who would plot against America and try to do Americans harm that we will not tolerate safe havens for terrorists who threaten our people. Now, why do I give you that quote? Because that's President Obama saying, see, I attacked Syria because they were going to they had a safe haven there and they were going to attack America. Luckily, now they're not going to attack America because we hit the group that we had not talked about before. Because ISIS, we already told you, was not going to hit America. So, but this new guys, they were going to hit America, and we got it. All right, now, all of a sudden, after we do the bombings, after all this is reported in the headlines, they then whisper to the press, we didn't really mean it. Here, let me give you the quotes. Then CNN turns around a couple of days later. The official said the group posed an imminent threat But another U.S. official later said the threat was not imminent in the sense that there were no known targets or attacks expected in the next few weeks. When there are no known targets or attacks, yeah, that would not be imminent. That would be the opposite of imminent. Okay? We're not anywhere near done yet. Then a U.S. counterterrorism official says Khorasan has the desire to attack, though we're not sure their capabilities match their desire. Okay, if you haven't figured out by now that this is totally made up by our intelligence community, by our government, you're not paying attention, okay? It's not that there aren't guys down there who are bad guys. It's not that al-Fadi didn't do something wrong. God knows, so you'd have to prove it, but of course we never do anything like that, right? It's not that he's not part of Al-Qaeda, but is there a group called Khorasan that was actually planning to imminently attack the United States? Fuck no, there isn't. No, there isn't, okay? I'm gonna show you more in a second. Imminently attack, they had a desire to attack. Do you know how many people you can point to in Syria and Iraq that have a desire to attack us? Okay, here now we go back to the New York Times, the guys who were not skeptical before. All of a sudden they got a guy coming out to cover his ass in case he gets caught, and he says American officials have given differing accounts about just how close the group was to mounting an attack and about what chance any plot had of success. One senior American official on Wednesday described the Khorasan plotting as aspirational and said that there did not yet seem to be a concrete plan in the works. This is coordinated. So they go out and say it's coming, it's imminent, etc. Then they go out a couple days later, they already did the bombings, they already got approval, they already got their applause, and then page 827 they bury, so they could later say in congressional testimony if they ever get caught, but they won't because nobody ever holds their feet to the fire. They could say, oh no, I also told the New York Times that it was not imminent just a couple of days later. I told them a couple of days later that I was totally lying to them earlier. But they printed that in the headlines, idiots. They put it in the front page, dummies. We use them, so what? Well, no, I've got my ass covered. All right, more ass covering. Now this time to the Associated Press. The guys who were the first quotes I read you about, oh my God, they're coming. Now listen to what they say. Senior U.S. officials offered a more nuanced picture Thursday of the threat they believe is posed by an al-Qaeda cell in Syria targeted at military strikes this week, even as they defended the decision to attack the militants. Now here's my favorite part. James Comey, the FBI director, and Rear Admiral John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman, each acknowledged that U.S. did not have precise intelligence about where or when the cell, known as the Khorasan Group, would attempt to strike a Western target. Kirby, briefing reporters at the Pentagon, said, I don't know that we can pin that down to a day, a month, a week, or 6 months. We can have this debate about whether it was valid to hit them or not, or whether it was too soon or too late. We hit them. And I don't think we need to throw up a dossier here to prove that these are bad dudes. Oh, why didn't you just say so? Oh, they're bad dudes. Well, that's why we have a legal reason to go into Syria. Because we had to get the bad dudes. You don't need a dossier for that. It doesn't matter. We already hit them. We already killed them. What difference does it make anyway? They're already dead. But trust us, they have now been downgraded to bad dudes. Richard Engel, who's actually a very good reporter, earlier had put out some reporting that he got from his sources inside the administration, like a lot of others did, saying, oh my God, this new group, this is what the government is talking about. And he now turns around and says, Syrian activists telling us they've never heard of Khorasan or its leader. Never heard of them. Now, when I said earlier that they don't even exist, you thought probably that's hyperbole. I'm exaggerating, right? Not exaggerating. Listen to this. We go to Andrew McCarthy. He's writing for National Review here, but he's a former terrorism federal prosecutor. He says, you haven't heard of the Khorasan Group because there isn't one. It is a name that the administration came up with, calculating that Khorasan had sufficient connection to jihadist lore that no one would call the president on it. Khorasan is something that they had roughly referred to in the area of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and it's not really a group per se, and it certainly isn't in Syria. And they figured people have heard of that before, so they'll let us give us a pass on it. Now you think, well, okay, well, I mean, Obama administration wouldn't do that. Well, let's go to former U.S. ambassador to Syria for the Obama administration, Robert Ford. Here's what he said. We use the term Khorasan inside the government. We don't know where it came from. All I know is they don't call themselves that. There's a guy from inside the Obama administration saying that's a term we use when we don't know who they are. There is no Khorasan. It's made up. We used it so we can turn around later and say, oh, everything we did was perfectly legal. This Khorasan group had a desire to attack us maybe 6 months from now, but don't worry about it, they were bad dudes, even though nobody calls them Khorasan and they're not really a group in Syria. Your government is lying to you. Now, a lot of you already know that, and you don't find that as a shock, but it is a little revealing to see the details and the brazenness with which they lie, right? But what's really sad and pathetic is the establishment media that just goes along with it. And Greenwald and his co-writer here at The Intercept did a brilliant job with it. We noticed it, but now that this article is out, forget like piecing it together, right? But now that the article is out and it's obvious, right? Are all these other groups making retractions to CNN, New York Times, CBS, all of them coming back and saying, my God, we're so sorry that we got used? No, business as usual. And the next time those same exact sources leak something to them, the same reporters and the same organizations will rush out and give you the official government position, full well knowing that a lot of times it's totally untrue.